Hi friends, my name is host Eric. I'm the host of Talking with Trans People, and somebody left a comment asking me to respond to this video. And it's well timed because I've been thinking a lot about matters that this is a good example to like meow off of. So before I even begin meowing, let me just point out this. YouTube seems to understand that people who like a certain kind of bad explanation like other examples of bad explanations. So I left this not fully cropped yet because I wanted to show you there at the bottom corner. Sugar is not a treat. I mean, the thing is, it definitely is a treat, okay? So when I went and got donuts yesterday, I was not getting an entree, and I was not getting a salad. And of course, if you're dumb and don't get that SI is a particularist thing, and that the way to know about your body is by attending to it yourself, it's not something that you look to externalities to explain your own body. Only NI people do that. Here's that B lady I talked to, who I liked a lot. She was really cool. She was absolutely delightful. And she told me that you don't have to eat food. And there's this guy who is mastering the art of not eating anything. He's not eating anything for 22 months and never felt better. Like, I told her, look, you need to get your crazy fucking unconscious SI out of this party, okay? Because, and then because then she tried to tell me, I explained to her, well, people like me have really high metabolism and not very good at conscious SI. I need to eat a lot all the time, and when I don't, I feel it in ways that are horrible. Like, it's just miserable. So the thing is, the idea that you can turn your body into some intellectual project is just insane. All right, let's watch this guy, though, about his belief in ghosts, because it's an excellent example to discuss how to think well versus how not to think well.
Why I believe in ghosts? Well, if you're expecting a long, closely reading argument about why ghosts exist, you might be in for a bit of disappointment, because my answer is very simply, I believe in ghosts because I saw one. Now, if you don't believe in ghosts, there are two possible responses to a sighting of ghosts. Okay? The first is, I'm not telling the truth, I'm lying. The problem is, this is a very unsatisfactory answer. I'm sure, absolutely.
Okay. So, if here's the leap that's already occurred that's unfortunate, right? He's not making distinctions and keeping them the same already. And if you make a distinction here and use a word like this, then you need to continue to use it like that for the entire duration of what you're saying, or you're not saying anything. So I tell you that the reason I believe in ghosts is because I saw one. And if you don't believe in ghosts, then this is your response to my justification for believing in them, namely having seen one. That you must either think that I'm lying or that I am mistaken, I'm assuming is the next thing he's going to say. Or that I've interpreted something that's not a ghost as a ghost, right? But here's the problem. How can I use your personal experience to inform my position on something? The only way we can do that is if that personal experience is reproducible. So regardless of whether I believe you that that you saw whatever you saw, that's not sufficient reason for me to affirm ghosts exist. Because for me to affirm ghosts exist, I need to have an experience like you in which I witness something. This is without getting to the core issue yet, which is so. But regardless, I witnessed something you would call paranormal, and it convinced me that paranormality is an ongoing part of reality. So, paranormality refers to things that are neither normal nor abnormal, but rather unable to be confirmed via normal ways, and or be pinned down and observed into clarity, you might say. So, the thing is, I don't think this guy's lying. I don't think most people who say they've seen a ghost are lying. I don't think most people who don't believe in ghosts think everybody who does thinks they're lying about it. I think it's much more common for people to say, well, they're not lying, they're just into pretending like that.
Absolutely, there are people who have lied about seeing ghosts. The original Amityville researchers come to mind. But it's clear, even if I, Sandy, am lying about my ghost, and I'm not, some of the people who've reported ghosts are not lying. It's logically not very satisfying to say, they're all lying to your response to ghosts. Once you take that option, you're putting yourself in the same exact category as anti-vaxxers and flat earthers and the...
Well, I agree with him that that's a terrible reason to not believe in ghosts, is that you've concluded that everybody who reports seeing them is lying. There's not any good reason to conclude that, and in fact, whether or not somebody's lying is something about which we as individuals can make a determination that's indeterminate, but nevertheless very, very likely to be correct. And that's, again, something that we're going to have to believe in our own intuition about. If I'm on a jury, the credibility of various witnesses is a matter for me to determine based on a variety of factors. There's no clear... If the witness in the court admits on the stand to lying to something, then they lose their credibility, maybe. But failing that, their credibility is a matter of our instincts about them, not anything else. So, yeah, lots of people who report paranormality are very credible witnesses. It's clear that they're being earnest in reporting the truth to the best of their ability. That's the most we can say about a very credible witness, is that they're doing that. They're not lying. They're not trying to deceive.
The more evidence that piles up, you just say, well, they're all lying. Everything can't be true. So this is the answer to these fringe groups as any information that doesn't fit their worldview. They're all lying. So let's dismiss that, okay? It's not the lying thing. On to the next response. The one you use when you can tell someone's sincere. Like me. Is the witness in error? Sure, I guess I could have made a mistake. But let's dig deeper. Why would a person like you not believe in ghosts? Okay, let's go into why a person doesn't believe in ghosts, assuming you don't. Is it because they're imaginary because someone told you so? Well, that doesn't make any sense, because here I can tell you that I did see one. So why is the person who told you there weren't ghosts more believable than me? You can't...
The thing is, we don't believe things because people who are credible honestly believe them and report their experience to us. We believe things when that person can reproduce that thing. So it's like, if I tell you that pigeons exist and that I saw one, and you go, I believe you, but I've never seen one. And so since your warrant for believing in it is that you've seen one, why shouldn't my warrant for believing in it also be that I see one? And then you say, well, here's one. I go, oh, you're right, that is a pigeon, I guess. I see, here's multiple instances of these things. And I go, well, I guess pigeons do exist. Because now I've seen them too. I know what you're referring to. And if we ever fall into dispute about the matter of their existence, we just need to go down to the park with some bread. And we can reconfirm our observational data. Observational data that's not reproducible or confirmable outside of your already had experience is not observational data that generalizes. So, but we still haven't gotten to the core issue, of course, which I'll get to in a second. The point is, why did you believe in ghosts prior to your experiencing of them? Did you take it on faith from other people telling you that ghosts exist, that they do? If so, why did you put more faith in their statements than the people who told you they don't exist? These are basic things that people who don't think well aren't going to get.
Use an argument from authority on this. Perhaps more defendable, you don't believe in ghosts because they don't fit into your worldview. For example, if you think that there is no afterlife, or conversely, you think there is an afterlife, but everyone goes into it and they don't stick around, well, if you're right about your worldview, then ghosts can't exist.
Okay, so it would be true that if you are affirming the position that no persistence of identity extends beyond death, that something that's generally understood to be a persistent entity after its death would not be unlocked by your paradigm. But that's not the way people operate generally. Only very smart people operate like that. Which is to say, they actually force everything that ought to cascade down and inform to do its job. Almost nobody else does that. So what ought to cascade and inform down here is the fact that before you can affirm the existence of something, you need to define what it is. And simply defining it as a persistent soul that extends beyond death is inadequate because there's no reason to think that that white thing, apparition, that's human-shaped is, in fact, a dead human. And for there to be a reason for him to think that dead human would have needed to not only make itself visible to him, but indicate to him that it was the remnants of a human that had existed but no longer did in the living realm, but continues to exist beyond that somehow. So, when we talk about ghosts, what we mean is paranormality, high strangeness that we can't explain, and it seems to break our understanding of how things can be explained. If I were to affirm the existence of Sasquatch, and I don't negate it, I'd have to acknowledge that for Sasquatch to exist, it's existing in some way distinct from what I'm purporting it to be an example of. If I'm telling you Sasquatch exists, the problem that this guy has with his lack of definition of ghosts goes away. Well, what kind of definition do you have for Sasquatch? Well, it's some kind of big monkey that exists and that lives in the wilderness, but that is extremely good at preventing us from proving that. The only way that we can understand paranormality that's not stupid is as high strangeness. High strangeness is that which, in order to be so strange, successfully attends to preventing individual human beings from making it reproducible so that we can use experience to validate it.
Okay, you must be correct about the afterlife. So right there, if you're wrong about the afterlife, then there could be ghosts. There are thousands of different opinions about the afterlife. I mean, I have mine. Every individual person has a slightly different view of any afterlife. Why would yours be for sure true? In fact, my own afterlife beliefs technically don't allow for ghosts, but I saw one. So to disbelieve in ghosts, here's the two things you have to put together. First, you have to believe that, first, my afterlife opinions are valid, or at least some variant of that doesn't allow ghosts. And second, that the ghosts are the spirit of dead people, and that won't work in my afterlife view. This is a reasoning not from evidence, but from some kind of logical conclusion. Now, what if ghosts are something else? I have no way of knowing that what I saw is the shade of a dead person.
Okay, well, and that's determinant on the question. So you don't believe in ghosts. You believe that you saw something that isn't explained by existing explanations that we normally afford legitimacy to. And so when you say, I have no way of knowing it was the remnants of a dead person, then why do you say you believe in ghosts? What you believe in is that you saw something that you can't explain. That it may or may not, it fits into some conventional understanding of what a ghost is, but ghost is like species. So I can look at that cat and know it's a cat. I can look at that person and know it's a person. And there's no single criterion that I'm using to make the determination that that's a cat and that's a person. And the reason cat is a defined term and person is a defined term is because we can produce multiple examples of them across time. And it's holistically the case that people are different than cats. But when we try to define cat or person, we come up with a problem here. Now we can, because the physicality of cats and people is what it is, we can verify our intuitive instincts that cats are one distinct kind of thing and people are another distinct kind of thing with sciencey empirics like genomic mapping and stuff. But that's because we don't have to worry about the first part moving around. Because nobody's disputing that those little furry things that say meow are cats, we don't have the issue of we have in typology where we go, this cat likes to cook. When people say things like that. But we're not in agreement that that's a cat. We can't just look at somebody and go, that's an ISFJ. And therefore, whatever measurements we make on this person, we're measuring that thing. Same with ghosts. Because with typology, I can nail down the first thing. It's just that there's not general consensus that when I say I'm certain about somebody's type, that should convince you that cats exist. They do, and they are different from other species, but unlike physical cats, personality type isn't subject to the easy intuition of physicalities.
Okay, it could have been some other phenomenon entirely. It would still be the thing we call a ghost. If there was, in my case, white, misty things vaguely shaped like a person that move around, and we call them ghosts, if you said, well, it's not really a ghost because we don't know for sure it's a dead person, that's fine, okay? It's the thing that we call a ghost. It's like, I remember a person arguing that there weren't such thing as sea monsters, and I said, you don't believe in giant squid? You don't believe in huge prehistoric monsters that lived in the Cretaceous? That things just, well, those are monsters.
Okay, but the thing we call a ghost is not defined. And there's not general. We might all, if we see a white misty thing, vaguely person shaped, it is the case that we would all say that's a ghost, right? But one half of the thing has to stay put is the key notation here. If you're going to make meaningful statements about reality and what an individual ought to affirm, then one part of the thing needs to stay put. So it is true that we've got instincts about ghosts. If we see this shape, we'll all call it the same thing. Same like with cats, right? There's no other side that stays put then. So it's like once you've established that we all agree by our intuition that these ghosts things are ghosts, now we need the empirics part to fill in the other half. So it's not sufficient that I can intuitively determine that these various parties are, say, all ENFPs or whatever. I have to then find empirics that validate the distinction I'm making consistently across the board in ways that are convincing to other people, because it doesn't require them to use their intuition. That's what's convincing about arguments, is when they're parsable such that we understand the relationships between the words being said and the mapping process in general. And our own map, therefore, accordingly, is informed.
Monsters, you got all the names. I said, well, how can you tell the difference between a giant underwater thing and saying it's a monster or not? I think you're being illogical. So what I'm saying is that simply saying you don't believe in ghosts has nothing to do with whether ghosts exist. Fishermen in the North Atlantic had seen and caught and interacted with giant squid, going back to my previous thing, for centuries. But biologists firmly stated giant squid didn't exist.
Okay, so here what he's doing is saying, look, we have this example of something where the thing does stay put. It doesn't change. Namely, if you can reproduce multiple examples of this large physical object called a giant squid, then we can do empirics on it to show that these giant squids all share a commonality of genetics that establish independently of our instincts that they're all the same thing. We can't do that with ghosts, and that's why this analogy is not a good one.
This despite the fact that they actually had photographs of giant squid, and they had actual specimens. The Smithsonian had specimens of a giant squid's arm and tentacles, but giant squid couldn't exist, according to many scientists, because they were kraken, and the kraken is a myth. So, for example, there was a scientist that described and named the giant squid in 1857, but he was ignored. Proof wasn't accepted for almost 20 years after that.
And that's because there wasn't sufficient proof. So it was the case also that the guy who came up with plate tectonics was right about it initially. But because he didn't have a means of falsifying alternatives, there was no reason to affirm what he was claiming. There was inadequate reason to affirm what he was claiming. It was reliant too much on other people's intuition. If you're intuiting the truth, like Jung did about cognitive functions, you may or may not be able to accurately lay it out as a case. And smart people don't affirm things that they can't substantiate. So it's also true that smart people don't negate things that they can't substantiate. For scientists who are saying the giant squid can't exist because it's a kraken and krakens are a myth, well, those were just idiots. Those weren't scientists. I mean, those were just complete morons. That's not an argument. That is not an argument at all. Something by this name can't exist because sometimes people have called it by this other name, and we don't like that other name. I mean, that's just idiotic, right? Nobody made that argument.
When a number of giant squid, for some reason, started washing up on Newfoundland, and then it was impossible to disbelieve. Now, of course, everyone says they're giant squid. I think ghosts are kind of similar, and here's why. Since literally prehistoric times, people have seen, interacted with, and reported contact with ghosts. They're actually much better attested to than giant squid, which only a few people had ever seen. Ghosts may.
Okay, so what's the problem here with this reasoning? He's, again, it's like if bodies of giant squids wash ashore, now you have multiple specimens. You can reproduce instances of the thing you say exists, which means you can produce instances of a thing. If we want to talk about a class of thing, like a species name, that's very easy test to use. If you can produce multiple instances of the thing that other people can evaluate independently of you, then you can establish its existence. That's the nature of existentiality and instantiation. Something exists once you establish an instance of it. It's non-unique once you establish multiple instances of it. Very straightforward.
Maybe not a lot of people have seen, but they're everywhere. With every culture, from New Guinea, tribesfolk to industrial nations, if something is this widely attested across the world, surely it's worth some degree of investigation. Now, I'm the first one to admit that most ghost investigation is not done very scientifically, okay? But what I'm saying is that you can't refuse to examine evidence for something so universal simply because your belief says it can't be so. Something has to be behind this belief, okay?
Yeah, something is behind this belief. It's generally your personal subjective experience that's convinced you that this thing we have referred to for all of human history, namely spirits, unreproducible but extant things, represents the same category of thing as giant squid, even though it definitely doesn't, because it's not possible. Thus far, nobody has met the criterion necessary for public affirmation. I can privately affirm what I believe as true for me, regardless of whether or not it ought to be upheld as true by other people. But if I then think that because of my subjective reasons for believing this are so convincing to me, that they should also be convincing to you, I've misunderstood the nature of justifications. Some of them are non-arbitrary, and some of them are arbitrary. Arbitrary justifications rely on data that other people can't access. So when you say, here's my experience, and tell us a story, we can access your story, but we can't access your experience. We can't validate it for ourselves. The key thing is, it's not that nobody should be so concerned about whether or not you're believable. It's not an issue of believing you and what you're saying. It's an issue of, do you have in place stout epistemologies? Stout epistemologies don't afford belief to things unless they've met certain criteria, because we recognize that we have the capacity to believe both subjectively, for our own purposes, for our own arbitrary reasons, and that such beliefs don't generalize. And we have the capacity to believe for good reason, and that such beliefs do generalize. So he's neglecting the fact here that probably nobody's telling him he shouldn't believe in ghosts. And to the extent that people are being smart and talking to him about ghosts, they're simply saying, it's not that I don't believe in ghosts exactly, it's that there's no way to validate exactly what a ghost is, or we haven't done so yet, because we can't reproduce multiple instances of them, so we can't run any kind of testing on them. Therefore, there's no objective data that everybody can analyze independently. We do have pieces of evidence, quote unquote, that we can all look at and evaluate independently. Things like security camera footage, witness testimony like this guy's, etc. But because we can't independently evaluate the thing being affirmed, we have to, in order to believe it, we have to get rid of the part where what we believe means something that's communicable.
Okay, it's something in the human brain or something out in the world around us. If the evidence is good, then you either have to say there's ghosts or say what the person saw that he or she mistook for a ghost. So this goes back to the question of what is a ghost? Let me tell my story. This is not my only ghost story. I have a couple others where I've seen ghosts, but this is the clearest viewing of a ghost that I had. First of all, I was 11 years old. My brain wasn't fully developed because I was only 11. At this time, me and my friends had been, there was a haunted house across the street from my house. Now, I say it's haunted because it was abandoned and it was cool to believe it was haunted. Later on, someone moved into the house. As far as I know, they didn't think it was haunted. But to me and my friends, at the age of 11, this house seemed haunted to us. And we told stories about it. We go in there and try to make up things about it. One friend of mine said that he saw a dark figure in the basement. I never did. But it was kind of got us thinking about ghosts. Maybe this it made it possible for us to hallucinate, though I doubt it, or maybe it made us more receptive, who knows. But during this time period, at the age of 11, one day, I was not near the haunted house at all. I was actually on a different street, okay? And it was night, and I was getting ready to go home, and I couldn't go home because I got ready to go home. I got there, I looked down the street, and there, in the middle of the street, was a huge, flowing, transparent white image. To me, it looked like a woman in a full Victorian-type dress. It was big. It was like 8 to 10 feet tall, and I couldn't see features on it. It was just kind of misty. It looked like mist. It was not raining. It was not foggy, but there it was, and it was streaming like it was rushing at me. And I was like, but as I watched it, though it kept streaming towards me, it never actually moved. It just stayed there under the streetlights. And I was like really frightened.
And I have no doubt that you're reporting this as accurately as you possibly can. And yet, we should both already be in agreement that your personal experience that's so convincing to you because you experienced it should not be so convincing to me because I didn't experience it.
In fact, I was so frightened that I do not remember now how I got home. Because to get home, normally I would have gone past that place, and I'm pretty sure I didn't because it was terrified me. Okay, now, this was my ghost. It was roughly shaped like a woman in Victorian era garb. Couldn't see a face. It was all white and misty, like made out of mist. Seemed to be moving, though it wasn't. Now, I'm not claiming that what I saw was the returning spirit of a dead person. For one thing, I saw this ghost in Utah, and while I'm sure there were some Utahns that had big, fluffy ballroom gowns with all the skirts, which they seemed to have, I doubt many Mormon pioneers actually had that. They probably just had regular, poor person dresses. But so I'm not saying this was a dead person. What I'm saying is that the phenomenon I saw would obviously be called a ghost by anyone else who'd seen it. They would see that and go, oh, a ghost. Now, could it have been...
Okay, so we should affirm that people report their experiences about paranormal matters. And that, generally speaking, the people who are most convinced about paranormalities are those who've had those experiences. In fact, if you're a passionate advocate of paranormalities, it's almost certain that you have had some experience that's convinced you because, definitionally, the nature of paranormalities is such that they're unreproducible pieces of evidence. And as such, they're definitionally hinting at things that can't be established. Because we can genuinely explain things, it's also the case that sometimes we can't. For an actual explanation to have any meaning, it has to be the case that there are attempts at explanations that fail. This is an attempt at an explanation as to, he's trying to explain not just why he believes in ghosts, but why we ought to believe in ghosts too. And he's acknowledging that he can't define exactly what it is, but says it's a non-reproducible paranormal event of some sort. That because many people, as he does, affirm their own experiences of such, that those who haven't had those experiences ought to affirm the validity of those experiences as evidence establishing that ghosts exist in the same way that genomic mapping establishes that a species exists. It's not just an intuitive mistake on our part.
An effect of the light. There wasn't mist, there was like a drizzle. Maybe it could have been an effect of the streetlights on the drizzle, but if so, I've never seen such an effect again, and I'm 64 years old. You'd think it would have come up another time. Could it have been a hallucination? Well, if so, I've never again had a hallucination when I was awake and alert. Ever. So I personally reject this explanation. Saying that it's this one thing that's never happened before and never again seems even less likely. Could it have been a hoax? Someone trying to fool me? Maybe someone shooting a light, but if so, no one ever seemed to take advantage of me. No one ever talked to me about it, and
Okay, so he's trying to be convincing about his evidence by being self-evaluatory about his own epistemological processes. Have I considered other possible things it could have been and eliminated those? And he's saying, yes, I have. And as a consequence, since it couldn't be anything but a ghost, it must be a ghost, and I'm not lying, so you should believe in ghosts too. But you're just shitty at epistemology. That's all. You're epistemologically deficient in understanding how belief, affirmation, and withholding of conclusions and stuff like that work if you're prioritizing being correct in ways that validate universally or outside of yourself. What you keep trying to do in this video is basically say, my particularist experience counts as universalizable data. But it doesn't, because to be data that counts, we have to be able to reproduce the thing you're talking about and examine it independently of you. Otherwise, it doesn't count as data. I mean, it counts as data for you, but it doesn't count as objective data, because to be objective data, it can't be reliant upon parts of the data that only you can access. You're telling us, look, I'm being honest. I believe you, but that's data only you can access. You're telling us, look, this is what happened as I remember it. I believe you, but that's data only you can access. You can't establish things to me with data only you can access.
And the ghost craze that me and my friends had, this killed it. We didn't talk about ghosts anymore. It's like seeing the actual thing squeezed it out of me. And since only other kids my age, 11 years old or younger, were interested in it, I don't think any of us had the technical expertise to do this. Plus, if they did, you'd think they'd do more than just this one thing to me.
This is this funny kind of reasoning where you go, look, I liked ghosts. I was into them as a fun pretend thing until I actually saw one. Then we never talked about ghosts again. We're supposed to use that information to recognize the fact that he's not just affirming what he wants to be the case. In fact, it messed up his happy relationship with ghosts once he actually encountered one. Therefore, we should be more likely to believe him, and therefore it's better for us to affirm what he's saying. Well, again, believing you is not the issue. It doesn't matter how earnest and honest you are. The issue is you're not making your case with objective data. So since we can't analyze it independently of you, then there's no reason for any of us to agree with you. When you make a claim or affirm something like ghosts exist, you can affirm it in ways that are just informing people like, I believe ghosts exist, and I understand that belief in ghosts is predicated on subjective data. Or you can say, I don't get the difference between subjective data and objective data, and I don't understand the fact that we can't establish something exists without some part of it being repeatably definable. And without the word being able to exclude from its meaning certain things by virtue of those repeatabilities. So it's like it's always going to be the case that for any individual, their own subjective experience might be convincing to them of something. What conclusions, what words they say about those experiences are going to indicate why they're talking about it at all. If the words about their experiences are parsed well, they'll explain to you they're talking about it because they're struggling epistemologically with subjective data that upends their normal operating epistemological paradigms. And they won't try to say, my experience should be convincing to you.
Now, could it have been a dead spirit or a demon or something else supernatural? Well, obviously, that's my go-to explanation, but I really don't know for sure. It was something, and I saw it, and I'm calling it a ghost because other apparitions like this would account for ghost stories. What I'm trying to say in this talk is that if your reason for disbelieving in ghosts is based on preconceptions, that you may want to re-examine those reasons. And I will add once more that while I do believe in an afterlife personally, the teachings of my church do not touch on the topic of ghosts, and in fact would seem to argue against it.
Okay, you've got belief all backwards. Beliefs are, there are two kinds of ways of understanding the word belief. Usually what people mean when they say they believe something is they actually mean they affirm it. So they're willing to make statements in affirmation of a given sentence that says something like ghosts exist. So you both, the other thing you can do is operate as though it were the case. Assume. To assume is to not include something in your argument, but to predicate other arguments on it. So it may be the case that you operate as though ghosts exist. Perhaps you do some sort of ritual to get rid of them from your house even. I don't know. That would be acting as though they exist. Affirming them, though, that to say that your position that is in contradiction to my affirmation is wrong. And that's perfectly fine to do. But in order to establish that, there are certain criteria that need to be met. So in order to even have an affirmation, you should first check to see, am I going to be providing justifications that don't require the other party to access any of my subjective data? If you can't provide such justifications, then you're not making an affirmation that you should make because, while it's fine for you to predicate your own beliefs on them, it is unwise for anybody else to predicate their beliefs on them because that would be affording your experience more legitimacy than their own, and it would be affording subjective data more legitimacy than it deserves on an objective calculus ground.
And this does lead to some cognitive dissonance in my head. Perhaps someday I'll be able to reconcile it.
Probably not, and probably you don't actually have any cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is a bullshit frame projection by TI people. In fact, people who aren't TI, who don't understand the way that language works as a binary exclusivity thing, they don't experience cognitive dissonance. There's no cognitive dissonance if you're FI, because you can both love and hate someone at the same time. You can both be happy and sad at the same time. There's no exclusivity in subjective experiential deliberation. Because that would presume that your process of being is controlled by your relationship to argumentation. It's the other way around. Your relationship with argumentation is determined by your process of being. You're not epistemologically stout, and never will be, because I don't know exactly what type you are, but because you don't evaluate things as it's just is he an ENFP? I'm not sure. It was like that was such a pantomime of reasoning. It's just this horrible, disgusting pantomime of reasoning. It's misleading farce. That's like, okay. I respect everybody's right and ability to engage in language regarding the matter of epistemology. But the problem is, people who engage in those kind of conversations are stupid. Usually, almost always. You have to justify things. Look, the best kind of epistemology, if you're talking about whose maps you can trust to be correct, it describes the justification process and the criteria for affirmation independently of whatever it is you're trying to affirm. And it applies that across the board. And it encompasses all different manner of belief and affirmation, and understands that certain sorts of affirmations require certain sorts of justifications if they're going to win the argument. And that the only reason anybody should ever agree with you is because you've won the argument. So, since you can't win the argument that way, this is stupid. Yeah. This is just like, no, dude, that's not how you think. That's just not how you think. Well, go and pretend sugar's not a treat too while you're at it.